explain how people can escape from an anarchic state of nature in which every person exploits their neighbours, and, as Hobbes said, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. Hobbes's answer is that all people must elect a ruler and then give to that ruler all power, basically to create a dictatorship by democratic election. Now, Hobbes had just witnessed the horrors of the English Civil War from his exile in France, and he appreciated only too well the consequences for a nation that had no leader. So Hobbes found an argument that supported absolute monarchy as the only stable way for a nation to govern itself. The striking thing about Hobbes's theory today is not these questionable conclusions, but his methods. Because by identifying the preferences of individuals and the nature of the way they interact, Hobbes created a theoretical framework that looks like a forerunner of what today is called agent-based modelling, which consists of agents, autonomous agents, who interact according to a certain set of rules. Today, theorists who use models like this search for what they call a Nash equilibrium, a steady state in which no changes of strategy or action by the agents can make the overall system any more stable, can make it any better. In terms of physics, this is rather like looking for the state of lowest energy that a system of particles will tend to adopt at equilibrium. So one can say that Hobbes decided that his system of interacting agents has, if there is no overarching government or authority, it has a Nash equilibrium that, in some sense, maximizes the power of individuals. So each agent tries to command and dominate the others, and this is what leads to a lawless survival of the fittest. That's what Hobbes wanted to avoid when he recommended a monarchical dictatorship as the solution. Later, political philosophers tended to debate or to criticize Hobbes' conclusions, but they didn't pay so much attention to his methods. It would be mistaken to think that Hobbes was completely objective about the outcome of his model, but nevertheless, Leviathan anticipates a physics of society in that it seeks to go from definite and mechanical rules of behavior to make a prediction about what the collective behavior of that group will be. Hobbes's Leviathan is it's a kind of collective commonwealth, a kind of being that, a kind of organism that is comprised of the wishes and the actions of this mass of individuals. So its ruler is a single person, but that person represents the commonwealth and is invested with all its power, and that's what's represented in the title pages of Hobbes's book. Hobbes essentially invented the idea of a nation-state as a collective entity. So what are the what are the properties of this Leviathan? Is it truly an embodiment of the whole population? If that's the case, then what we need to ask, what is society like? Are there definable characteristics that come out from all these individual behaviours? In the late 17th century, political and natural philosophers began to wonder whether there was some way of understanding that by measuring society. And one of the advocates of this approach to society was Sir William Petty, who was a scientist and a founding member of the UK's Royal Society. And Petty was very politically active. He was a pupil of Thomas Hobbes, and he was a member of Parliament, and also an advisor at different times to Charles I, to Oliver Cromwell, to Charles II, and to James II. Petty recognised that by studying society, one could hope to emulate the precision of science, and he called for what he characterized as a political arithmetic. And this induced Petty's friend, a man called John Graunt, in the 1660s, to promote what he called social numbers as a means of guiding political policy. So Graunt compiled tables, so-called mortality tables, tables of deaths, because he felt that good legislation and government was impossible unless you had this sort of information. Petty was one of the first people to study the political economy using numbers like this, but he did that in such a dry and heartless manner that the English writer Jonathan Swift was inspired to satirize Petty by offering the rational suggestion that the Irish poor might sustain themselves by eating their children. Now, births and deaths were a big preoccupation of the early pioneers of these social statistics, and astronomers in particular were prominent in that group. They were people who had really benefited from Newton's mechanics, and so perhaps it's not surprising that they feature among the pioneers of what we can call social physics, this search for law-like behavior in society. Astronomers knew that the measurement of planetary motions had led to the orbital laws that Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton had derived. So they wondered whether social numbers might in the same way reveal social laws. Now, during the Enlightenment, many philosophers regarded science and rationalism as the key to a utopian era of freedom and equality. And they felt that by understanding these laws, they could find a prescription for a society like that. In 1784, Immanuel Kant spoke about universal laws which, he said, however obscure their causes, permit us to hope that if we attend to the play of freedom of human will, we may be able to discern a regular movement in it, and that what seems complex and chaotic in the single individual may seem, from the standpoint of the human race, to be a steady and progressive, though slow, evolution of its original endowment. So this is a way of suggesting that these laws might be seen in mass behaviour. Now, on the one hand, this belief of laws of society beyond the reach of governments was a product of the Enlightenment faith in the orderliness of the universe. On the other hand, it's not hard to see within it the spectre, the ghost really, of the Industrial Revolution, with its faceless masses of toiling humanity, like so many swarming insects. Before the 19th century, laws that applied to John Graunt's social numbers, such as the fact that the death rate stayed approximately the same on average, these were regarded as evidence of divine wisdom. But to later commentators like Thomas Malthus and Karl Marx, these statistical trends became the preconditions for social catastrophe and revolution. The term social physics was first used by the French political philosopher Auguste Comte in the 18th century. In his book System of Political Philosophy, Comte argued that this discipline would complete the scientific description of the world that Galileo and Newton and others had begun. So what were these laws? Well, the French astronomer Pierre-Simon Laplace began to offer an answer to that. In 1781, he collected the numbers of male and female births in Paris, and he found that they were almost equal. And he explained that this was simply the expected result of a random process, rather than, as previously thought, being a sign of God's wisdom in making sure that everyone had a spouse. So Laplace, this is the kind of thing that Laplace was looking at. He showed that the variations in these and other social statistics could be described by this kind of curve, this so-called error curve, that described the probabilities of tossing a coin.